If you had to articulate your, I don't want to limit it just to your professional standard because I really feel like it's
Hmm.
a life standard. Do you
Hmm.
have a moral code or standard that you operate from right now in your life before we go back
So
into the backstory?
one of my mentors, and I again, I heard like this quote long time ago, but one of my very first mentors, a guy by the name of Old Man Myrick or Steve Myrick, I'm sure we'll get into him a little bit more, told me one time to pursue excellence in the ordinary. Excellence in the ordinary. So how you do anything is how you do everything, right? So, and it all starts with intention. So my intention, and I shared this with you and your team before when you were on my show. My intention is to showcase the thought leader that I'm bringing on for the hard work that they fought to achieve. Like, all of us in creating content in general, if we're doing it well, it's a journey to create it well, you know, and it starts with, I kind of get up and do the same routine every day. I try to lead by example. I try not to ask people not to do things that I wouldn't do myself. So I'll give you an example. We have one of my larger businesses. We have a production meeting on Fridays, and I went ahead and had a conversation today, and I misspoke during the middle of the meeting. Well, part of our culture is to make sure that if you make a mistake, you just own up to your mistake and move on. So I made a public mistake. I turned right around 10 minutes later and made a public apology. Like, it's just like either you're going to be who you say you're going to be or you're not. I've been on this journey for the last 20 years of trying to figure out what congruent Stephen is. Like, how does Stephen's heart, who he is at his heart, start to begin to showcase itself to everybody in the world? How do I show up in the world? So I think excellence in the ordinary is just doing the little things the best you possibly can with whatever experience you possibly have or whatever you have at your disposal in that moment. And it gets you out of automated approach. You stop responding to everything and you start choosing everything. And I
Mm-hmm.
think, choosing kind of like, okay, well, we want to, when we do events, I'll spend time on an ink pen. I'm like, I don't know, this one doesn't feel right. Like it doesn't write really well. Like the ink runs out super quick. You know what I'm saying? Because you can have an amazing event and to get all the way done with it, and like a week later, everybody's still filling in their notes and having a good old time, and then the ink runs out of the pen. Like this stupid pen, kind of thing. So I want to make sure that no matter what we do, um, that people in general are having an experience when they think or work with me in general, like just in general. Like I want to make my life has been changed by the power of experience through the lens of congruence. And if
Mm-hmm.
I can stay in that zone, then excellence in the ordinary becomes automatic rather than something that, that I'm just kind of like, whatever will be, will be. I don't believe in that methodology.
Hmm. Yeah, that reminds me of I have a similar sort of approach. And just recently, I just got back from London. I was in Europe for a couple of weeks, and I'm now currently in Mexico, and I'm on a Mountain Time, U.S.
Mm-hmm.
Mountain Time. And there's always a couple of days of like jet lag and that kind of
Yeah.
thing. And I had a standing meeting that I do every other week at 5 p.m. on Wednesdays with my community, my online community. And I made the cardinal sin of taking a nap the day I got back. For like, it's gonna be a 30-minute little nap,
Yeah.
not a big deal. 2 hours later, I see all these missed, calls and messages. I missed the
Yeah.
meeting that I was
Oh gosh.
supposed to lead.
That you lead.
And of course, I could have said, oh, I had some technical issues and just kind of BS my way through it. But, I try to really use those small moments that aren't really life or death and people would understand. I use those to really allow myself to become more vulnerable to my own experience,
Mm-hmm.
and I made an announcement, say, hey guys, this is very embarrassing to admit, but I overslept.
Mm-hmm.
I just got back into town. I was having jet lag and but I overslept, and that's why I missed the meeting.
Yeah.
And we're gonna make it up tomorrow because I'm like a super stickler for punctuality too,
Yeah, me too.
and excellence and all of these things. So, but it felt so good to just own what actually happened,
Mm-hmm.
even though no one probably would have even questioned if I'd said it was a technical
Yeah.
difficulty. I would have known that. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's what you're talking about when you talk about excellence in the ordinary.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely a huge piece of it. The other thing that I was thinking of, just as you were kind of relating that, is the ability to be transparent, right? So in today's world, you and I were talking about this a little bit off air. The world has been nuts off and on for a while now, for a variety of different reasons. And I think people are searching for truth, right? And they're having to siphon through all kinds of various levels to get to truth. And what I've discovered is truth actually starts on the inside and works its way to the outside. So when you're being transparent with someone, they can sense truth, therefore they gravitate towards it rather than repel away from it. And I think especially in the educator, content creator, thought leadership world, author, speaker, all that kind of stuff, it's never been more important than ever before to be as authentically transparent and truthful as you can possibly be, because I think people can sense now when somebody's being fraudulent. Mm-hmm. And that's the quickest way to stumble across or limit the amount of impact you could make if you're not being truthful and transparent. So maybe the adage is, kind of like, you can't be truthful without being transparent in general,
Let's stress test this thought, because I agree with you, right? But I consider this other, like you and I, you're the head of your thing, I'm the head of my little thing. But let's say someone was working for us, mm-hmm. and they overslept, and they missed an important task, mm-hmm. right? How should they think about truth and transparency in that situation from your experience? Because I'm sure you've dealt with a lot of that kind of thing happening.
Yeah, we've had a few team members along the way. What I try to do is I try to set the example. Like, if I bring someone into my organization that's brand spanking new, and I sit them down at a table and I say, this is what we stand for and this is what we stand against. And let's assume for a second that what we stand for is, one of the things is punctuality or being on time, or another thing that we stand for might be, yeah, if you make a mistake, just own your mistake and move on, right? It's a learning lesson that, so if they come into the organization and we say that, but we don't live that, then they know it's a lie, and then they're going to feel more compelled to cover it up. Okay. Which is going to make the leader that's supposed to be quote unquote leading them probably more aggressive than they probably need to be in, holding them accountable for the mix up or mess up. Okay. Conversely, if you come in and you say, okay, team, this is what we stand for, this is what we stand against, this is super important to us, and then set the tone. And then an hour later, I myself, as the CEO of multiple businesses, goes out and completely butchers one of our core values, because I'm hungry, I'm tired, I'm jet lagged because I travel as well. Like, you're not your best self when you've got all these things going on necessarily, but I'm short tempered or whatever. I got two choices. Either I can act like that I'm special and somehow it's okay for me, but not for you. Or I can say, guys, I totally screwed up here. This is what we stand for is real. This is me apologizing, owning my stuff. So can we work this out? Because a lot of times I find that a sincere apology or a sincere amount of accountability or responsibility taken gets a lot of grace from a lot of other people that were dealing with that situation. Like, people who think you're sincerely corrective and you believe what you say and you stand up for what you say and you stand up for kind of the expectations and you then do it, they'll give you the grace in the runway. So I'll flip that around. So let's assume that I've said that, I've illustrated that, and then we have a team member that makes a mistake that I've made in the past or something like that. They come in the door. I got two choices. I can either show an expression of empathy and compassion in conjunction with accountability, or I can just show accountability, right? What I've learned is this is another thing that old man Myrick taught me. He taught me a long time ago that when dealing with people specifically, to try to always use the feel, felt, found approach. Because if you use feel, felt, found approach, what happens is people tend to learn. And if you don't use that approach, they typically just tend to resist. So I understand how you feel, and you're being authentic. You're giving a real reason of how you feel that way. You can talk about, okay, now it's felt. Okay, this is how it made me feel or felt. This is how it felt. Let me tell you what I found. This is what I've learned. Right. So, for example, we're talking about what I've learned. What I've learned is don't show up and be inauthentic. Right. If you make a mistake, own your mistake, and everybody else will see that. And there's an old adage, I think Patrick Lencioni said it. He says that culture is oftentimes caught, not taught. right? People are going to, it's like children watching a parent. They're going to do what they see you do, not what you say they should be doing. Right. So if
Mhm.
you're cursing all the time and whatever, they're going to start cursing all the time. If you're not being accountable to your actions and you're stiff arming, like they're going to do the same thing. So I feel like that's at the core of it, like of a congruent lifestyle, is being congruent when your beliefs and your values are congruent with your actions.
Mhm. Yeah, I think my old man Myrick was your dad's boss, right? And
Yeah.
then you
Yeah.
were. So I want to. He sounds like he was sort of like your Obi-Wan Kenobi figure in your life. But just to help us appreciate that dynamic, let's take it back to the early days in Raleigh. You have a bit of a, for those Americans can probably detect, you have a little bit of a Southern
Just a
accent.
little. It ain't too
Just
bad.
a
My parents call me son. So I feel like I'm doing pretty good.
little. All right. So talk about your childhood. And I guess what I'm most interested in hearing about is what was your dynamic like in your family?
Mm-hmm.
I know there were some, issues between your parents, but I
Mm-hmm.
want you to tell in your own words. What were some of the ideologies that you remember your parents echoing, good or bad?
Sure.
And what was your talking about catching culture? What was what idea of success did you catch during your younger years in terms of like what success looks like and what you want to do with your life growing up?
Well, a couple things that come off the top of my head real fast. One of the things that I've been very careful with choosing my words nowadays is if I use my past upbringing in a negative connotation, it actually anchors me to more of a victim mindset. So
Mm-hmm.
I've learned to kind of position my words a little bit differently. I've also learned to accept those that were difficult in my journey for the benefit of having their own journey. So with the audience, I would recommend that as we talk through these things, realize that these people were doing the best they could with what they knew and how they could. And because I have a feeling that a lot of folks will resonate with some of this stuff because the nation's economy in the US, for example, which is where I spend most of my time, largely deals with single parent households in some way, shape, or forms. Okay. But the reality is you got two broken people who decide to get married to try to build a whole relationship, which never functions very well long term. And I'm sure I've been there myself. I've dated people that I wasn't a whole person. I wasn't ready. They weren't ready, and it turns into a mess. But my father struggled with alcoholism for a number of years. He grew up in a alcoholic environment where it was kind of natural. My mother, on the other hand, grew up in a very, in certain instances, after her parents split, in a very abusive environment by the mother's boyfriends and all kinds of stuff. So she had traumatic injury. And lo and behold, I come along in 1976. Unbeknownst to me that my parents are struggling or whatever. And by the time I think I'm probably 5 or 6. They'd already had my little brother Ryan, and yeah, by that time they'd already had enough of each other. My dad had made a bunch of mistakes in the relationship. I'm sure my mother, based on what she's told me, didn't make a bunch of great choices as well. At some point in time, I don't know the full catalyst, but they both kind of disappeared from my life. My father moved to Colorado. My mother went into a couple of healthcare areas for a little while to get some help, and then came out of the healthcare areas and then kind of went to Kentucky or somewhere else. And that actually led me to living with my grandmother, who was my mom's mother, who was awesome for me. And this is where the journey is super important and understand. This is why if you're really seeking healing, fulfillment, contentment, significance, and meaning, and all those things, you need to actually understand how you're shaped. Not that you get to use it as a tool to kind of like prevent yourself from accepting whatever the next step is. But in this particular case, my grandmother was empowering. She was loving. She was awesome. I honestly didn't realize that my parents were gone during a huge chunk of our time together. And then about the age of 9 years old, my grandmother comes over and pulls me to the side and basically tries to, in her best way possible, to communicate how sick she was becoming. She had just gotten diagnosed with cancer, and this is in the 80s. I think it was 86 or 87, in that time frame. And of course, chemotherapy was just as dangerous as the cancer then. Like it was. So I think she kind of already knew the writing was on the wall. But at 9 years old, she started teaching me how to make, food out of anything I boil water or pour milk into. So I started taking care of myself, my little brother, getting ourselves up in the morning with an alarm clock, dressing ourselves, walking I think it's probably maybe 3 or 4 blocks to the school. Fortunately, it was a good community. I did get bullied a lot on the way to and from school, unfortunately, during that season. But by the time I was 11, my grandmother had passed, and then my parents come into the picture. My little brother moves in with my mom. They moved to Florida for some reason. I move in with my father to another place here in North Carolina we call Fuquay Arena. So, which is a even more southern than where I was growing up at the time. And then literally moved in on a Friday, Saturday morning, I was on a job site carrying studs, 11 years old. And by the time I was 13, I was buying my own school clothes and stuff like that. By the time I was 16, I was running framing crews for my father, doing construction. And it was probably around 16 or 17 years old that I met old man Myrick. Now, in this specific juncture, you talk about belief systems and how you view opportunity, success, growth, or whatever. All I had known up until that point was blips of empowerment, blips of happiness, blips of joy. But other than that, a lot of negativity by people who said they love me, right? And anytime your parents split, you always think it's your fault. Well, I say always, but a lot of folks end up internalizing that in their wounded child as it's my fault. They left. They don't love me. Now I have worth issues, so on and so forth. So I had all of that rolled up into a bag of chips. Okay. On top of that, my father at 16 or 17, unfortunately, was losing his business. So one afternoon, he comes to me and he says, crying, he says, I always want you to remember that Scoggins don't get ahead, they get by. Now, instinctively, I knew that was a lie. However, emotionally, I took it on as a truth. And in times that I've shared that particular statement with other people, it's almost like they can immediately go back to something else someone said in their parental journey. It may not have been mom or dad, but it was someone that they looked up to for love and support and admiration, no matter how one-sided it may have been. Okay. It was probably a year later that I met old man Myrick for the first time, like actually spent time with him. He'd watched me on a job site summer after summer, weekend after weekend, holiday after holiday, work my butt off, learn to read blueprints at 16, 17 years old, and came to me one afternoon and pulls me down and says, hey, come in, get in this car for me for a couple minutes. Of course, it's hot as all get out. So I'm like, anything to get some AC. And I pop in the car, and he asked me two very profound questions that gave me the chance to choose if I was going to live a different life. The first question was, what is the difference between a rich man and a poor man? I responded with money. He responded, but absolutely not. It's the way they think. And the next question is really what I think began to turn my corner, because it began to tell me that I had a choice in how my destiny would play out long-term while I'm on this earth. And he said, do you want to learn to think like me, or do you want to continue thinking like your father? The reason that's powerful in a lot of respects is because most of us don't realize we have a choice at any given moment to choose life over death, so to speak. Choose an abundant life of peace and freedom, and over settling, living someone else's life, not being authentic, being congruent. I could have chosen to continue in the track that my father had been on, or I could choose to go and become more of what Steve had shared with me that was possible. Steve was wealthy. He was very generous. He was always giving to other people, always giving to the community. There was nothing for him to leave stuff under a basket of hush puppies and bless a single waitress, that, had a child at home or whatever. Meanwhile, my dad was always borrowing and never repaying. So it was an interesting dichotomy of what possibilities lay before me. And I think that's what started the journey overall. So at any point in time, we have a choice of lack and limitation or growth and abundance. And the tension between the two is what actually gives you the wisdom to create the other.
All right, I got a couple of follow-up questions here just to kind of flesh out the scene a little bit more. Did you have a big family? Was the Scoggins family a big family, or do you have a bunch of cousins and nephews and uncles and all of that, or is it just
so we
small?
had a good sized family. And my grandparents, my father's father, we would have a Scoggins Sunday function, that I did attend off and on while my parents were separated, which was always really cool. I'd say moderate. I think my dad had 4 brothers and 1 sister. And by the time I was the first grandchild of no second grandchild on that line from everybody, and I think they ended up with 32 grandchildren. So it ended up becoming quite large after the fact.
And was there evidence in the larger family that Scoggins you get by, or is it was there
Yes.
any contrary evidence to that statement?
No. Yeah. It was. I'll give you an idea. So I did a ancestry thing a number of years ago, and began to kind of dig back in our history. And I know we came from southern Scotland, moved into Northern Ireland, moved into the west coast of Europe or England, and then from there over to the United States. As I was doing my digging, one of the things I discovered was is we ended up here because of shooting a deer on a lord's land as part of a penal colony. So when England was coming here to populate the United States, or sending folks to populate the United States as a whole at different times in history, at some point in time, we came here as to be basically become sharecroppers based on a serving out of indebtedness, so to speak. Mm-hmm. That trend continued all the way to me in either construction, farming, or somehow a lot of heavy manual labor. So Scoggins historically have always been really hard workers. They get up super early, they work super late, and they do their best to scrap out a living. Okay. And that's covers 400 years. Seriously, I mean, it's literally, it's all my grandfather, my uncles, my aunt that was my father's sister. She married a really good dude, and they managed to do pretty well in life overall. But for the most part, in fact, I'll tell you this, wealth was evil in the Scoggins household. So if someone had wealth, there was an assumption of they must be evil to get that wealth, to have generated that wealth, even though numerous times my grandfather and my father lived off the generosity of Steve Myrick. You see what I'm saying? So it was a really weird mindset.
So what was your dad's job on these construction sites? What was he responsible?
Well, they did a variety of different things. So it started with my grandfather. In fact, Steve Myrick actually used to work for my grandfather as a laborer, and then, which is kind of nuts. And then because of alcoholism within my grandfather, the tables ended up getting turned. Steve Myrick becomes a home builder who hired my grandfather as a framer. And then my dad learned the framing trade accordingly. And they did framing, interior trim, and basically anything you could cut or nail up that was wood. They did on a regular basis. So that was kind of like the generation.
So Myrick is a residential developer, basically.
Yeah, well, he was a residential home builder all the way up until 2003 before he passed away.
Okay. Now, you dropped out of high school as you were going on these construction sites and whatnot. I guess the legal age you can do that is what, 16?
For us, it's 18. I was able to do it 2 months ahead of my 18th birthday.
Okay. But you were working at the construction sites while you were a teenager.
Yeah. Yeah.
Basically. Going to school?
Well, no. So I was going to, so this is where things get a little tricky. This is right after my dad, his business failed, foreclosure happened, repossessions happened. Steve Myrick puts us in a mobile home that he owned to try to stabilize us a little bit. And then through my dad's best efforts of working, but not being a good steward of money, kept putting us in financial hardship on a regular basis. So much so that we lost whatever car we had. And after walking enough times to the extended length of time to a bus stop that was about 2 miles from the house, doing that day after day after day for a while, water getting shut off, electricity getting shut off, having to constantly kill cockroaches, like all those types of things, I think just weighed on me. And at the end of my junior year, I remember having this kind of like this moment where the water had gotten shut off the last time, waking up, wanting to take a shower, couldn't take a shower, where I think I just realized that this is not going to, we are just getting by. We're not doing anything better than that. And I kind of realized that, or at least for me, I told myself, whether it was a lie at the time or a lie now, that if it was to be, it was up to me. So I went into the school that morning. I forged my dad's signature, and basically dropped out of high school, and then went to work full time literally the next day. But I did so at not a construction company for this stage in the game, but as a trash company, a company called Waste Industries. And while I was there, I began to stabilize myself. I was able to get us a family car. I was able to kind of get the lights turned back on, get everything kind of stabilized and all that kind of stuff in this mobile home that we were in. Probably doing that another 6 or 8 months, and began to kind of climb the ranks pretty quickly at the trash company, which was interesting. And from there, basically, I could probably moved out on my own probably 6 or 8 months after that. But when I say out of my own, I was literally like 3 trailers down
Mm-hmm.
at a different rental. But yeah, and then from there went back to construction.
So when you're working in construction or trash or waste management, obviously you're learning on the job skills, but what were some of the underlying uh, interpersonal relationship skills that you were learning that helped you to move up the ranks?
When I was working in the trash company, it was interesting because the value of work ethic was higher there, where in
Mhm.
construction it was expected.
Talk
So
about that. What do you mean by that?
so when you're in, at least, and I can't speak now because I'm not doing physical construction anymore. But when I was doing physical construction in my youth, um, showing up early, leaving late was expected. There was no additional thank yous for it or nothing like that. It was no, it was like, this is what you do. I remember my dad told me one time, he said, well, if you can learn to swing a hammer and like do that, you'll never have to worry about eating as long as you can swing a hammer, because you can always fall back and go build something for somebody. Right. And in the construction side of things, again, it was just day in and day out labor, day in and day out labor. There was no expectation of opportunity. Um, a massive advancement in construction was an additional $2 an hour, right? Whereas when I went to the waste management company, it was an official business that had already been scaled into a regional conglomerate. There was already, I don't know how many waste industries around the country, up and down the East Coast specifically, that were actually home developed here in where my event center is here in Garner, North Carolina. So when I began to work hard there, they began to come and appreciate me, which made me feel good. So I was like, ooh, so if I do this, I get this reward. And a lot of times it was just as simple as a thank you or a thank you card or a handshake or a high five or, something like that. And that slowly progressed in, well, if I can do that, then I can do this. And if I can do that, then I can do this, all the way to the point within my 3-year time frame with them. I went from delivering trash cans on a day in and day out basis to end up being an assistant manager of what they call a roll-off division, which is a large trucking side of things, where I had people that were double my seniority, double my age, taking instruction from me. And we had this guy named Hurley, who was awesome. And I remember this, I was getting a lot of grief from a lot of the drivers I was trying to like literally strategically make strategic decisions, which is where I probably learned a lot of the strategic thought that I've got. And Hurley piped up and said, what Stephen just told you to do is genius. Go do it. And he was 45 at the time. I think I might have not even quite 20 yet, which was really interesting because when he came back in, I remember being in a meeting where he stands up in front of all these drivers and he's like, Stephen just saved you guys 3 hours of peace. And you didn't want to listen just because he was a kid, kind of thing. And that started the trajectory of maybe there's leadership qualities, maybe there's strategic thought, maybe there's stuff in me that I believe in a higher power, God, Jesus. That's my dog. But that has been placed in me that maybe I am capable of breaking through the ceiling. In fact, funny thing is, at 13 years old, while in that trailer park, or about 14 years old, I went down to the park one evening, not thinking anything of it, and then literally this was before I actually had true faith, where I started believing, felt compelled under the stars to just kneel down on the stars and say, God, if you're real, please let me be the one to break the family curse. Now, if you look at hindsight being 2020, that prayer's been answered tenfold. At the same time, I had no idea how difficult it was going to be to change myself enough and unprogram, years of negativity, bad programming, to shift myself in such a way to have hope and belief. And a lot of it comes down to Steve Myrick. A lot of it comes down to opportunities to lead. A lot of it comes down to learning to not even learning, having to, like, you won't survive unless you get super creative to solve this problem. Right. And I think that's at the core of what began to change me from the inside out, where one day I was able to build a couple of businesses.
Do you think in hindsight that's what Mr. Myrick was attracted to within you? Is that ability to solve problems and also being young enough to kind of take instruction and coaching?
I would like to think so. You know what? I wrote my first book in 2014, and part of that was getting some writing assistance because I have dyslexia. So obviously, when I write things, it's got to be edited pretty hardcore. Um, but I got a friend, and one of the things that he went to go do was to actually go and enter, because my personal story sounds so far fetched in a lot of cases with different levels of it, that it doesn't even sound like it could be real. So, this is a good friend of mine. He still doubts if the stories I'm telling are true. So I send them out, and he goes out and interviews a lot of people. And Steve Myrick had passed away by 2003. And so he went to go talk to Steve Myrick's widow. And I said, well, when you go to talk to her, please ask her one question. And he said, okay, sure. Tell me what the one question was. I said, please ask Lona, why me? Why did he give me a chance the first time? Why did he give me a chance the second time? Why me? Like, out of all the other people, the Scoggins, the other people that were on his cruise, why me? Why did he pour into me? Right. A month goes by. He does a lot of the interviews. He comes back and he's trying to debrief me on. He's like, well, dude, I can't believe that most of these stories are true. Like, this is wow kind of thing. I'm like, well, okay, cool. Like, thank you. He goes, well, I did talk to Lona. So what did you ask her? The question I asked you? He said, I actually did. And he goes, oh, well, I'm sitting on my chair. I'm like, well, what did she say? She said that Steve chose to help you because you reminded him of himself. So Steve was a merchant Marine, got into business with no professional training in business, and built a multi-million-dollar empire, and was very generous and everything, as I mentioned before. And something within me resonated within him. So I know that, one of the things that you're super passionate about is this word called purpose. Okay. I think a lot of people think of purpose as what can I achieve rather than what can I bring. And what I mean by that is Steve Myrick changed my life from the inside out, and which led me to a certain truth on that one conversation that's now been, other people have used this and said it different ways, but essentially there's three great purposes in life from my perspective. The first great purpose in life is serving the person you once loved, serving the person you wish you could have saved. So that's where a lot of nonprofits come from. And the one that holds true for me is serving the person that I used to be. Steve Myrick was serving the person that he used to be. He was serving the long shot, the underdog, the person that, if taught well enough, would put in the work to bring the fruit to bear. Most of us close ourselves off to possibilities because we believe those limiting lies, those limiting beliefs. I would have done the same thing had someone not had the conversations with, and numerous conversations, by the way, numerous conversations where I'm sure there were times where he was like, why am I, this kid, he's killing me, Smalls, because I did a lot of dumb stuff while I was trying to figure things out. And then when I adopted my daughter as an adult, before she had her first child, I remember with my wife at the time, when we were having a conversation about her, I was like, before she moves in, I just want you to know she's going to make mistakes. So while you think she's going to come in and be perfect and immediately learn from us and be able to apply these things to her life, she's going to make mistakes. And sure enough, 6 or 8 months, same crap that I used to battle as a kid, limiting beliefs, toxic relationships, or your circle of influence, like same old. And then, my wife at the time was getting irate. She was getting super mad. I was like, this is part of the process. Meanwhile, my daughter would sit down with me. I was like, how did that feel? So it sucked. I'm like, okay, well, maybe next time listen to me. Right. And, you stumble enough times. You're like, well, maybe there's some experience here that I should be listening to, because there's only 2 ways to learn in life. The experiences you have and the experiences that other have that you choose to listen to and learn from. Those are it. One is less painful than the other from my perspective. You know what I'm saying?
So speaking of stumbling, talk about that. You made a bunch of money and then you ended up living in a car.
Yeah. So around 19, right up there at the 19-20 ratio, I went to go back to work with Steve Myrick. He needed a siding contractor. I just left the trash company that I'd spent some time with. Maybe I was 20, maybe I was closer to 21 actually. Spent some time with the trash company. I had a falling out with a guy that they had bought a guy's company, and then they brought him in to be operations manager. He was to this day, he was by far the worst leader I've ever worked for in my entire life. To this day, the lowest amount of EQ I've ever seen in a human being. And I didn't even know what EQ was then. So, but long story short is I leave the trash company, and Steve Myrick comes to me and he says, "Well, look, I've got this guy that's not working out for me. I want to put you on his crew. Let you work for him for a few weeks, see if you can learn, pick up what he's doing, and then let me know if you can do it." So a few weeks go by. I learn about it. The guy stopped showing up for work. So Steve goes out and buys me all the equipment, everything that I need to basically put myself into business for myself. Like the truck, the tools, the equipment, all of it. Insurance helps me understand what kind of like basic tax level I would be at, because I was still obviously very getting started, very early in the journey. And because of my work ethic, and because I admired Steve so much, I gave him all I had day after day after day after day, which obviously allowed me to start having a lot of rewards. I started doing pretty well financially, but I was still very young, and I'd never been taught how to handle the money.
What kind of money were we talking about? Six figures?
Yeah, I'm six figures by this stage in the game. And this is in the late 90s. So six figures went a long way. Long way. And I didn't buy a house. I was still living in the mobile home that I'd bought a couple of years earlier. Like I had a Pontiac Sunfire at the time, which is like, a micro sports car, on top of whatever the company vehicle was. And yeah, I was doing really well. So I wasted all the money. I went out to clubs. I went out to what we used to hang out was putt golfing games, and spent a bunch of money in the arcades and meeting girls and whatever. And then I leveled up. I bought a brand new 1998 Camaro, first one on the lot, paid way too much money for it, had like 18% interest because I didn't know what the heck I was doing. And that started a domino, because then the car attracts females, females that weren't healthy. And I'd never, as a human being, been taught how to attract healthy individuals.
Were you sober, or what was your relationship with alcohol?
I actually didn't have my first alcoholic beverage till I was 23.
Okay.
So,
you didn't touch the stuff because of what your dad was experiencing.
It scared the crap out of me. The same with cigarettes. So cigarettes killed my grandmother from my mind. Cancer, or whatever. So both of those things scared the crap out of me. So I stayed clear of that. However, I think if we're honest with ourselves, all of us, at least one point in time or another, have been addicted to something. And I was addicted to ladies. I was addicted to girls. I wanted to impress them. I wanted them to think I was special. Hindsight being 2020, I realized now that I was looking for outside affirmation to feel special within myself, which I think we've all done at some point in time, and maybe still do, which has got to be kind of fleshed out over time. But I met a brown hair, brown eyed girl, maybe an inch or so taller than me, in my first book. She's known as the barbecue girl, because I obviously don't use names anymore, but she took me on a ride for my life. It wasn't long before she was cheating on me with boys and girls. It wasn't long before she had my credit cards and she was charging them up on a whim. And of course, when she does the charge over here, I don't find out about it for a month, kind of thing. Not to mention, at the time, my credit was strong enough where rather than shut off the credit card after you hit the limit, they just kept raising the limit. $1,000 here, $1,000 there, $1,000 here. Next thing you know, I'm tens of thousands of dollars in debt. My heart has been crushed. I don't know my identity. I don't know my significance. I don't have fulfillment. I don't have meaning. I don't have anything to anchor myself to. And then all those voices from my dad and the Scoggins don't get ahead, get by stuff starts coming in. And then that failure window starts pouring in over like an overflow. Next thing you know, I show up at a job site one morning, and I'm so messed up that I'm literally, there's what's called a brake machine that bends metal for residential house construction. And I'm on the brake machine and I'm bending metal, but I can't stop crying, and I don't know why. Like I wasn't feeling anything. Like there was no thoughts going through my head about I'm sad, I'm depressed, I'm whatever. I just couldn't stop crying. And for some reason, I decided to take the tool belt off. I dropped it on the ground, and I literally just walked away from it all. And
Mr. Myrick wouldn't have been impressed with that, would he?
No, he wasn't impressed at all. Which makes the second chance he gave me all the more valuable. But I walk away. I stop answering the telephone. I shut the curtains. I stayed in the mobile home for probably a good month and a half, 2 months. Obviously, all of my income dries up really, really fast because I didn't have anything in savings. I was spending all of it, blowing all of it, and ended up having my brother move into my mobile home and take over the payments of the mobile home, which was $276. And in that grand scheme of things, it was really interesting because my brother let me rent a room in the home that I owned technically with one condition. And that was that I would stop seeing Barbecue Girl.
Mm.
And of course I didn't.
You were still seeing her?
Off and on. Yep. Well, because she was like, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. I didn't know what I was doing. I love you so much. Please give us a second chance. Like that stuff over and over again. Like I was a sucker. It's the other way around. I was a sucker. And yeah, so that didn't work out. He actually came home one afternoon and caught us both in the house together. And that was the end of that. So he kicked me out. And I bounced around couch to couch and couch for a little while. And then ended up in a borrowed friend's car for a little while. Ended out outside for a little while. My homeless journey was all over the place. And it was all because of pride and arrogance. Like I think that one of the biggest things that gets us in trouble a lot of times in our life is either tied to ego, pride, or arrogance. Mm-hmm. Like some of the biggest problems I've ever had in my life have come down to pride, arrogance, or ego. Like either my ego was in an unhealthy place, which kind of drove the arrogance because of self-worth issues, because arrogance is another form of undealt with self-worth issues from my perspective, right? But in almost every case, that's what kept me, because I could have picked up the phone at any point in time and called my dad, said, hey, this is what's going on. And I could have couch surfed, but I was embarrassed because a year earlier, I was the golden child. I was the Scoggins that was going to break the curse. I was the Scoggins that was going to do big things, kind of thing. And I found my faith around that same journey. And then, I got a second chance.
How did that happen? How did you find your faith? Was there a specific moment, or is it just kind of an accumulation of little things?
It was a specific moment for me. And a lot of people have a hard time with it because it sounds a little bit unbelievable. But after attempting to take my life at a bridge shortly after all these different events, because you get low enough, you start really, really dealing with major self-worth issues and voices, if you will. I call it the voice of failure, the voice of lack, or whatever. There's always a quiet whisper that tells you you're special if you'll listen to it. But for me, it was a battle getting there. So I escaped the episode of almost taking my life. Following day, a couple of days later, my brother gives me an opportunity to clean a litter box in the mobile home.
Hold on one second. I think that's a pivotal moment because Barbecue Girl's mom was the one that helped you, right?
No, so Barbecue Girl's mom was a good friend of mine. However, the woman that you're talking about is named Susan Batch. She was my 16-year-old high school sweetheart's mother.
Got it. Okay.
So still a girlfriend's mother, just a different one.
Okay. Just let's double tap on the suicide thing, because I'm again, it's people may be experiencing something like this, and I think it's helpful to hear how you kind of navigated that situation.
Well, I navigated because I had some help.
Did you have a plan? The plan was to jump off the bridge, or
what? Yeah, I mean the plan. So first of all, there was no going into that afternoon. There was no premeditated. Today's going to be the day in my life. Okay. In fact, it was supposed to be the day my life was going to change. I've been training for a number of months to begin to work on the process of starting to become a Navy SEAL, about to go to Michigan, to Great Lakes, and pour myself into that. And what they were doing for me specifically was I was one of two people in our area that wanted to become a Navy SEAL. So what they did is they went ahead and started sending us a couple of a retired frogman that was a Marine, and then also a retired Master Chief from Virginia Beach down to our area to start working with us on the physical requirements, specifically running, swimming, endurance, stuff like that. We did the whole, in scuba diving, they call them BCs, which is like a big vest. We were doing it basically with like straps and tanks, which they told me was normal for the Navy. But we went through that training. And so I spent, I don't know, probably 8 or 9 months, like getting in the best shape of my life. Like when I show up to this day, I'm expecting to leave. I'm in great shape, 6-pack, got the arms going, got the whole thing going. Like my serotonin levels, I'm sure are high because of all the training I was doing. In fact, that was one of the key things that helped me shake off the depression, if you will, of dealing with the Barbecue Girl. was this activity, getting out and just getting moving again. And it started with the first day, it was just starting getting out of bed. Then it was getting out of bed and going into the mobile home. Then it was getting out of the bed, going into the mobile home, then walking around the park. You know what I'm saying? It was incremental, but it was intentional. And after all this training, I finally think my life's going to change. I go to the MEPS, which is the Military Enlistment Processing Center. The one here in Raleigh is at the corner of Capitol Boulevard and 440, which is where this intersection is. And I show up there and I'm excited. I got my duffel bag. I got my red Timberland t-shirt in there. I got my Walkman, my broken Nokia 5160 phone that my grandmother had got me to call her when I got to boot camp. You better call me when you get there. Not knowing they would have confiscated it immediately anyway, but hey, it ended up working out. So got the bag, got everything going. I'm sitting there chit-chatting with all the people sitting there. So, some are going to the Army, some are going to the Navy, some are going to Marines. And we're all like, well, I'm going to go do this and I'm going to go do this. And, we all think we're the greatest thing since sliced bread. And, we're there to start getting our shots and get sworn in and all this kind of stuff. Well, just before all that was supposed to happen, a guy comes out to me and he says, "Hey, Scoggins, come here." And he kind of waves me over. And I get up to get out of this chair with like the old high school thing where it's kind of like shaped like a C, where you kind of like scooted in, but you had a table in front of you. And as I'm kind of going through that scenario, I'm sitting there and he's like, "No, grab your bag." I'm like, "Grab my bag?" Okay. So I grab my bag. He takes me to a back room and proceeds to tell me that I wasn't joining the Navy that day, unbeknownst to me. And there were really two factors. The first factor was I had a GED rather than a high school diploma. And at the time, because I had a GED, I had to score higher on the ASVAB than someone with a diploma. I don't know why that makes sense, but that was what it was at the time. The second thing was I didn't know it at the time, but during part of my medical eval, they had discovered that I've got scoliosis at the top of my neck, however minor it might be. Okay. Between those two things, they basically assured me, while I could take the ASVAB again, that I would have back problems for the rest of my life. And the Navy was not willing to take on the liability of having what could become a massive medical issue, which is kind of weird because I'm 47 years old now and I'm pretty stinking healthy. But it crushed me. It crushed me. It was another example in a long line of examples why, even though Steve told me I could do better, even though Steve told me I could, if I just learned to think different, that my life was destined for failure and mediocrity. It was just destined for it, right? And between having numerous times of feeling mediocre, numerous times of not measuring up, numerous times of things that I put my hope and my sincere focus into falling apart at the last minute, like all of this kind of garbage, I think I had enough. And I made it to the door of MEPS just before, literally, as soon as I opened the door, the waterworks started and I couldn't stop crying. I was weeping. I just started walking. I had my duffel bag and I just started walking. As I started walking, I found myself overlooking an 8-lane highway sitting on top of a bridge. Now, this bridge had a tubular rail. And I remember taking my shoes off and just sitting there. Now in the walk to the bridge was what I could refer to as like you'd see in Bugs Bunny, where you got an angel on one shoulder and a devil on the other. And there was a flat out war going on. What I noticed was in that moment, and this is something I think is important for anybody's going through a situation, hopefully like this, hopefully that they can work themselves out of, is the negative voice was yelling and shouting, if you will. Like I could almost, and I use this word loosely, almost audibly, like when your thoughts are intruding and the vibration of the volume in which they're doing it at. Okay. So the negative side was very loud, very, very apparent, very like super dialed in. The other side was a bit more of a whisper. So every time the negative voice would say something mean or hateful or whatever, the other voice would say, "No, that's not true. You're this, you're that," which is kind of weird. I don't know if that happens to other people, but I think it must happen to enough people for Bugs Bunny to put it in a cartoon. So long story short is I end up on the bridge, and then the quiet voice at the last minute kind of like says, "Well, if this is going to be it, when you're ready to leave, then you should at least reach out to people that you love and tell them goodbye." And so I picked up the broken Nokia 5160 phone with a cracked screen, dialed my dad, no answer, got the old answering machine message or whatever. I tried my mother, no answer. I tried my grandfather, who had been trying for a long time to spiritually advised me on not giving up and stuff like that. I made one other phone call, and then I made my final phone call to a woman named Susan Batts. And Susan Batts was my first, I would call it my first love, right? Because you have girlfriends and whatever, boyfriends, whatever, you're growing up or whatever, but you have somebody that you're just like, wow, you're it, right? Well, when that relationship ended, I had built a relationship with her mother, where her mother had actually clothed me. She actually paid for stitches in my hand. She took care of me. She actually mothered me when my own mother wasn't around. And she nicknamed me Sugar Wooga. I nicknamed her Mama Wama. And that was a beautiful thing. And I called her. She had an old cigarette voice. She picked up the phone. She's like, she's trying to get me to tell her where I'm at. She already knows instinctively something bad, something really crappy is happening. She's trying to put her finger on it. And I would love to say that I was a person of integrity then, but I wasn't. Like, if I shook your hand and gave you a yes or a no, I may or may not follow through on it, unless you were Susan or Steve. That's it. And throughout the course of this conversation, she finally gets to get me off. I think she knew I was suicidal. I think she instinctively knew that I was in a very dangerous space. And she ends up getting me to agree that I would call her at 9 a.m. the next morning. Now, a lot of tug of war to get me to agree to that, because I had every intention of following through. And fortunately, she was more stubborn than I was in this particular moment, thank God. And so I agree to that, which gets me off of the crisis moment, if you will, but it doesn't change my trajectory. It's crisis management. So then she reaches out and she says, I want you to repeat after me. I'm like, what? It's crazy. Like, what? Repeat after you what? And of course I'm whimpering, tears in my eyes or whatever. She says, this too shall pass, and what comes next will be greater. And I'm like, that sounds cheesy. She's, no, say it. I'm like, well, this too shall pass, and what comes next will be greater. She screamed at me. She said, say it like you mean it. I was like, you thought she was the drill sergeant. And sure enough, it was something in that. In fact, when I speak, sometimes I'll have the entire audience stand up, especially if they feel like they're having low energy state. And I'll have them get up and scream through a progression based on this one moment in time to shift the energy state in less than 5 seconds. Most people don't understand that they can shift their entire mental state and their energy state within 5 seconds or less. They think it takes hours of therapy and all this kind of stuff. No, and this is what did it. What I didn't know at the time was within a week, I would find my faith. When a week after that, I would get a second chance from Steve that I did not deserve, that turned into the first of the larger businesses.
Okay, so if you don't mind sharing, how did you find your faith, and what prompted that second chance? What was Steve going through that made him?
So again, I think we touched on a little bit, but I was given the opportunity to earn some fast money and some money I desperately needed for my brother. And I don't know about you, but $50 in the 90s was, equivalent to 100, 150 nowadays. It was good money. Right? It was enough to kind of get me unstuck, so to speak. I hadn't yet been given a second chance. So I didn't have full-time employment anywhere. I started doing odds and ends wherever I could for a little while, for literally a few days, mowed a few lawns, washed a couple cars in the trailer park or whatever.
And what was Ryan doing at the time?
He was actually doing pretty good. He was working for a restoration company. He had a normal 9-to-5 job, making decent money, and he's handling his own business. He got married, had his first daughter, they had their cat.
So he had his shit together.
He did, which made me feel a little. At the time, I think it made him feel special. At the time, It made me feel like crap.
Yeah, because he's 3 years younger.
He's 3 years younger, and he had always looked up to me to that time. Like, even when we were split up apart, when he was with my mom and I was with my dad, he himself was already considered, like, for some reason, he always in fact, when we were growing up, my name wasn't Stephen, it was brother. Right. So it was just a really weird role reversal during that time. But he offers to let me clean a litter box in my mobile home that I technically still own in my name, but he's making the payments on. So that's obviously another guilt shame kind of thing. I had slept on my dad's couch the night before, agreed to go do it. Thought $50 is great money for cleaning a litter box. How bad could it be? Get up the 7 stairs in the mobile home, open the door, walk into the mobile home, through the living room, old gray shaggy carpet looking stuff, cross the linoleum, blue wallpaper on the left and the right, little cabinetry over to the right hand side, grab a Walmart bag, pass by the little laundry room, into the master bedroom, and I can smell ammonia all the way from the front door. Walk through the double doors into the master bathroom, and there was this litter box. And to say it hadn't been clean is an understatement. What they did was they kept pouring sand on top of what was there. So it was like a snow cone of Tootsie Rolls and stuff. It was just disgusting. So I quickly see that. I kind of take a quick glance at the Walmart bag and realize that this ain't gonna be big enough. Go back into the kitchen, grab a full-fledged trash bag, go back into the room, and then get to work. Now, what's important to understand with regards to faith specifically in divinity is at this time, I had been professing that there was no God, there was no divinity for probably 5 years in a deep, deep level, because I couldn't understand, I couldn't reconcile in my human brain why if there was a real God who really loved me and really wanted to spend time with me and really created me to do something, right? That I actually had created value, that I would be going through all the crap that I had gone through up to that point. Because it seemed like I was the only one going through it in my general line. Now, granted, I'm the only one that asked for that prayer. But I remember just getting there and I start digging, and, I'm digging as fast as I can because I'm disgusted. The back of the handle catches a big clump. Handle snaps off the plastic piece. I get angry, obviously. I'm like, come on. Are you freaking kidding me? Right? Realize I still need the money. I remember having this thought. It's like, is this what my life has come down to, cleaning cat crap? Right. I remember having that moment because remember a year and a half earlier, I was good. Like I could have bankrolled pretty much anything. Right. So the amount of arrogance here was in direct proportionate to the amount of humility needed to get me equalized from my perspective. And so what I do is I put my thumb in the back of the scooper to kind of use it. And it was, of course, that was just like, it just made me had that stomach turning thing. And of course, now I'm moving faster and faster and faster and faster and faster and faster because I'm trying to get it over with. And of course, through my haste, the corner of the scooper, which was kind of a square edge on it, caught the corner of the plastic bag, ripped a 2-foot hole in the plastic bag, and everything that I had picked up was all over the place. Something came over me in that moment in a big, big way. I always tell people a lot of times when I'm trying to explain kind of this experience that if you think about Rocky Balboa and him fighting Ivan Drago or Clubber Lang the second time, okay, where he's already got his butt handed to him, and now he's going stepping back into the ring, trying to prove to himself that he still got what it takes or whatever the thing is. And there's always this point in those early Rocky movies where Rocky's like, no, hit me right here. He's like, dancing around the ring and Clubber like smack him in the face, or even Drago's popping him in the head. When I dropped that scooper to the ground, I began yelling every obscenity that I could think of and every hurt feeling and every negative thing that I've ever could think or ponder at the top of my lungs, staring at the ceiling, yelling at a God that I said not even a day earlier I didn't believe in. And when I did that, it was almost like there was a presence in the room with me where it was like, just hit me right here. Come on, let's get it out of you. Come on, you're almost there. Let's get this garbage out of you. Like kind of like it was weird. I didn't hear it. I sensed it. Mm. And I remember having this moment where I said, if you're so blankety blank real, why don't you prove to me you're so blankety blank real? And I was not expecting a response at all. Was not expecting it. However, all of a sudden my legs gave way, my knees hit the floor, and I couldn't move. I was paralyzed. Now, to tell you what was doing that, I can't tell you in humanistic forms, basically, other than The quietest whisper, that it was a very similar whisper that I remember from the bridge. It just basically said, "Are you ready to surrender yet?" And so much of my personal transformation has come down to surrendering over and over again at different levels, that in that moment, I didn't really feel like I had a lot of options other than to surrender. But when I did surrender, it was like everything that I had been carrying for the prior decade was coming out of me all at one time. Simultaneously, it was like I was being filled up with a level of grace and mercy that I honestly I didn't deserve. Well, I didn't feel like I deserved it after all the things that I had done, all the wounding that I had done to other people, all the wounding that I had done to this divine entity, like, if you will. And I'll never forget this for the rest of my life. While sitting there, the moment I said yes, it was like somebody had taken honey is a lot of times if you can heat it for tea and stuff like that, it's warm and gooey and it can kind of pour out. It was like somebody poured a vat of oil or honey on the top of my head, from the top of my head all the way down to my toes, slowly. And I don't know if it took 10 minutes or an hour. I just know I could feel it with every little hair follicle on my body, like transitioning down my entire experience. And then when it was over, I remember getting up off my knees, feeling the most peace I've ever felt my entire life, feeling the most contentment I've ever felt in my entire life, feeling the most sure I had ever felt my entire life. My personality actually changed that day entirely. It was not only the beginning, but it was a catastrophic switch in my personality. I remember getting up off the floor, looking out in mobile homes, they have these long rectangular windows, and bathrooms are like, maybe 3 foot tall by like a foot wide. And looking out the window and seeing this pine tree branch just flowing in the wind, is like it was slow motion. Like you would see it in a movie where it was just like all of a sudden there's fast motion, and all of a sudden the camera just slows it down. And I remember it was the first time I ever felt like I was me. Like I had somehow found a way to get back to center. And I knew that I never wanted to get away from center ever again. To this day, in fact, I probably should ask my brother. I don't remember if I ever actually finished cleaning the litter box. I don't remember. I do know that I was brought to that stage to confront myself and my decisions and my behaviors and my actions and my thoughts, and be given a choice to do it differently, have a do-over, if you will. I do know I got there. But I remember that night sleeping, like actually sleeping for the first time in months. Like I was so emotionally exhausted after the experience that I couldn't function. I think I slept for 11 hours straight. Like I was utterly exhausted. My body finally relaxed. My emotional state finally relaxed. My spiritual connection was connected, where it had been broken, disjointed, or unaligned, or whatever. It was just different. My dad comes home the next day in the afternoon and says, "You're not going to believe this, but I talked to Steve and he's willing to let you back on the framing crew. Are you willing to come and work with me again?" And I'm like, "Well, I need work." Sure. So we get up the next morning, I go to work, and, we're doing framing, we're building the house. We start with the first floor and get the first floor basically done, and we start working on the second floor and whatever. And I'm, passing up wood and, nailing stuff off and laying walls off and just doing the construction thing, right? Going through the motions. But I always kept out of corner of my eye, I would always look for Steve. And every time I would see his Jeep coming my way, I would go hide. I would go hide in the back of the house. I would go, all of a sudden, "Oh, I need to go move some studs." So I would go back and move where he couldn't see me. And that went on the entire week. The entire week I was there. And then on Friday morning, we go back out to the job site. We're doing our thing. In the construction industry at the time, on Fridays at 2:00, you knocked off. You didn't do, basically that's when everybody would go get their paychecks and go start their early weekend, basically. Okay. Well, just before that was to happen, my dad sent me next door to reframe or straighten a garage door so a garage door guy could put a garage door on. But while doing that, I had to go and do that while listening to the guys that had taken over from me a year earlier. They were actually actively putting on siding, and which is what my core company does. And while I was listening to them, they were talking bad stuff about Steve that I knew was fraudulent and untrue. One of the things that they were talking about was how they were underpaid. Everything in construction works on a draw schedule. You're 50% done, you can draw 50% of your money. These guys were less than 50% done and already drawn 70% of their money. They were already out of balance. But they also had an addiction. And they were trying to figure out how to creatively get Steve to do what they wanted him to do. So their bright idea was, well, if he doesn't pay us what we want today, then we just won't come back Monday. And so I overhear this. And as I'm doing that, I finished what I'm doing on the house. I began walking back towards the house I was working on, which was literally right next door to where my dad was at. And I remember being so mad at these guys for treating Steve like crap, not being on, just not. I was scared they were going to hurt him, even though they wouldn't have. All of a sudden, my emotional state went to protecting Steve. While I'm doing that, the same whisper that showed up on the bridge, the same whisper that showed up at the litter box, the same whisper that was like there with me in that moment said, well, isn't that what you did? When I heard that, something inside of me lit up. And the guilt and the shame and everything else that I've been carrying literally all week, trying to avoid Steve at all costs and not whatever, was a wake-up call. And all of a sudden, about this time, Steve's bringing the checks and whatever. My dad and him are exchanging the checks. And I just feel compelled. My dad's going to get the checks. He's walking back this way. I'm walking this way. My dad's like, where are you going, dude? Like, to be sure you're not going to talk to Steve. Like I just, and you could just tell in his eyes. I knock on Steve's window. He rolls his window down, and good old Southern guy. He said, what can I do you for? Right. Good old Southern language, like you would see in any other movie for a Southern guy, big old white pearly dentures. And, I said, well, I overheard these guys. Da, 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 da. He goes, well, how's your head now, boy? I'm like, well, and I instinctively knew what in translation that he meant, like, how are you? Like, are you depressed? Are you screwed up? Are you still involved with this chick? Like almost all of that kind of subconsciously communicated. And I just told myself, I'm doing really good. I'm good. And I'm sure my countenance was different than the prior Stephen, because I was different. Even though it was only a few days old, I was different. I knew I was different. And he laughs at me and was like, well, boy, I'm not buying you tools, not buying you equipment. I'm not doing that again. You burned me, boy. I'm not doing that again. You crazy. And he goes, you don't have this, you don't have that, you don't have people, you don't have insurance, you don't have any of this stuff. I just said, if you will give me a second chance, I'll figure it out. I will figure it out. And to be sure, it was interesting because he sits back in his chair and goes, I'll tell you what, if those guys aren't here at Monday morning at 9 a.m., I'll let you finish the house they're working on right there, and we'll go from there. How about that? I said, done. He smiled at me. I shook his hand. He rolled up his window, and I started walking back. My dad obviously overhears part of this conversation. He's jacked, yelling at me. What the hell have you just done? Are you crazy? Like I'd been on the framing crew like literally a few days, right? And here I am putting my foot back in the big pile of manure in his mind. And I just remember something exploded inside of me. I was like, this is something I have to do. And I yelled it. I have to do it for me. I just have to do it, right? I knew that I had to do it, right? There was no uncertainty whatsoever. And he stops. He stops and he goes, And he walks over to the old beat up van that Steve technically owned that my dad was driving, opens the doors and starts pulling tools out. I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, do you remember when we did stuff in the summers? I'm like, yeah. What do we make the ladders out of? Wood. What do we make the scaffolding out of? Wood. Pump jacks? Wood. Braces? Wood. Pretty much the answer was wood, right? And he goes, all right, we'll go start pulling stuff out of the trash piles. We got stuff to build. It was the first time in my life that my dad showed up. First time. And sure enough, we spent the entire weekend building the things that I would need on a whim in hopes that these guys wouldn't show up at 9 a.m. in the morning. On faith, on trust, right? Where weeks earlier, days earlier, I had finally been authentically transparent with myself about who I was becoming and how disgusted with that I was, and how I was willing to do anything to change that. And sure enough, Monday rolls around. Steve comes by. I'm there super early. Steve comes by a few times. I'm like, can I go yet? No, you can't go yet. And 9:02 on Monday morning, he rolls over, looks at me, says, boy, what you waiting on? Yells at me. And I went to work. And that was the first house of the large construction company that provides the live event center that I'm currently standing in right now, that employs several hundred team members across multiple states because of a second chance. So my purpose in life is to give second chance to as many people that will allow it.
Love that, man. It sounds like a movie.
Angel Studios has asked for some interest in it, so we'll see what happens.
Awesome. So give us a little montage of all the things that have come from that. You mentioned the studio. What does that mean?
Yeah.
How many, talk about the number of businesses you have and how it's all impacting the world.
Yeah. So at the time we're talking right now, I have 7 companies total, generating high levels of revenue. 8, some depending on which business it is, 8 figures or above, in certain categories. What I've discovered was that entire experience with Steve and that learning curve of faith and all of that stuff. It let me learn how to use my hands, which taught me how to use my head, which then later taught me to use my heart. So now I merge my heart and my head to create transformational experiences for other people in general. There are 3 ways in which we do that. I help aspiring thought leaders, people that I feel like that have had a similar journey to mine, meaning they've been through something, they come out the other side, and their character was never shaken. They managed to be authentically, congruently, and they're ready to serve the world. So I'll do whatever it takes to help them with media and resources and videotaping and stuff like that. I stumbled my way into doing events for other people. So we did Ed Milec's book launch and a few other folks. And I discovered that I can serve and create impact just by allowing other people with a profound message to impact others. Mm-hmm. You become a linchpin into something greater. And then we also have my own curriculums, which are Unstoppable Live and then Unstoppable Startup. Unstoppable Startup specifically is designed to help that gritty entrepreneur build his 8-figure empire. And throughout the course of all that, you learn more about me. You learn more about the processes, the strategies, the techniques. You learn more about yourself. And yeah, that's kind of the core of everything that we do now.
So going back to the original question that Steve Myrick asked you about what's the difference in a rich man and a poor man. And he said that the answer was the way they think. Can you talk a little bit about mindset when it comes to, and I think, building an empire and all that, it's just really, it's a healthier relationship with abundance, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it can be abundance in all areas of life. So it doesn't have to necessarily be monetary, but what is that mindset difference like as you've evolved in your career trajectory and building these businesses? How are you thinking now that you reflect back in the early days, think, wow, that was still operating by limiting beliefs in this or that area? Mm-hmm. And what is that process like, that evolution process like?
So let's change the word from rich man and poor man. Let's change those words entirely.
Okay.
Let's change it to abundance mindset, poverty mindset.
Right.
Okay. Abundance mindset lives a life of intention. Poverty mindset lives a life of reaction. Abundance mindset invest each and every day in time, talent, resources, and people. Poverty mindset says, it's what can you do for me? How can you do it for me? How can you help solve my victim mentality? Abundance mindset says, I know that everything's happening for me, not against me. Poverty mindset says, everything is against me. I can't win. There's no way for me to move forward. Abundance mindset says, I'm willing to learn from the greatest minds on the planet in any given category. Like, for example, when it comes to meditation, I always consume your stuff, right? Because I want to be congruently me. Okay. Poverty mindset doesn't do that. Poverty mindset stiff arms people that can actually instruct. They say, out of pride and arrogance, and again, I've been there. They say, I know me better than anybody else. What could they possibly add value to me? Right? Abundance mindset says, not only do I understand the need for learning and growing, I want it. So therefore, rather than doing what the poverty mindset would do, which is I'm consuming movies, books, TVs, all that stuff out of just sheer entertainment. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. It comes down to the focus of intention. And I think when you boil it all down into one thing, It's what are you focused on? What is the intention behind what you're focused on? Because if you're focused on why everything is going against you, you're going to feel all that. If you focus on no one's there to help you, you're going to feel that. Like it comes down to the intentional focus of your time, your talents, and your resources. When you wake up every morning, I learned this from Wayne Dyer. Granted, I didn't get a chance to meet Wayne. He was a virtual mentor, but to get up and just say, thank you, thank you, thank you. Please let me be of service today. Please let me add value to someone else's life. Because each time that I have gone through that spirit of gratitude, and each time I've gone through that spirit of wanting to be of sincere service to other people, I have had no, quote unquote, what the Bible would call no lack of gain. It's not like I haven't had adversity, but I've been protected by certain catastrophic events or relationships or things like that. And I believe that's because of I think we share this, the vibrational frequency that I'm putting out to other people that brings me opportunities. The work with Ed Milet for the first time and to get to know him and some of the other folks that he had on the stage with him, that was new. He didn't know me from Adam when he first stepped foot in this building. But when he got here, he knew that my sincere desire was to be of service. And I feel like if you come from gratitude, a sincere desire of service, and a full-fledged intention of wanting to grow, and call it self-actualization, self-enlightenment, call it whatever you want, but become the highest version or vibration version or whatever of yourself in this lifespan, then no matter what you face, you will be successful.
Mm-hmm. So if someone's listening to this and they're thinking to themselves, well, I'm working in a service-based type of capacity and I feel grateful, and I have great relationships with my family, but I don't make a lot of money and I still have to work a lot. So would that be interpreted as there's some scarcity happening there, or does that not even really matter? It's really about how you feel internally. How do you think about that?
That was a really hard one. And the reason I say that is because some of my most unhappiest moments, I've had a lot of money.
Mm.
So I don't think that money drives happiness. I do think in certain cases it can make certain parts of your life easier. But with every dollar you earn, there's somebody else that wants a dollar from you, kind of thing. There's that. And they expect it. Like when I first started doing pretty well, my father started wanting to borrow money from all the time. Right.
How did you deal with that?
At first I did it. And then I finally started saying no. Actually, I take that back. I started saying no. And then I said, I'll let you earn it. And I would give him methodologies to earn it. Mm-hmm. And as a result, he would have a healthy level of pride in the earning of a resource. And then I got to where if you're going to take the resources that I'm giving you and you're still going to squander it, I'm not giving you any more resources. So it's been a tug of war, but now he operates in a pretty healthy capacity. Now he has no intentions of becoming wealthy. That's not what he wants. He's happy to be okay with where he's at. And that's why I say, I think it's a personal journey. Like, I think a lot of times we're sold on the idea that we have to become wealthy or a person of influence or affluence to have meaning. But somebody's giving birth right now to a future president, most likely. Well, maybe not right this very second, but hopefully it's a good one. Somebody right now has just helped somebody break free from cancer. Somebody right now has just stepped up for the first time and become a father or a mother the first time for a child that's been craving it for years upon years. Some folks are teaching other people very instrumental things to have a healthier well-being. So I think it's a very tricky scenario. If you feel like your frustration is not having money, then there's a high likelihood it's tied back to a poverty upbringing or poverty mindset. Because the reality is principles govern promises. So if you want to become wealthy, you have to follow the wealthy minded steps. Spend less than you make. Look for an ROI on everything that you do. Don't be wasteful. Be charitable. Like, there are ways to get there. And you also have to accept another, I think, a super important one is accepting yourself with where you're at. With entrepreneurs all the time, every entrepreneur on the planet thinks they should be further ahead than they are. It doesn't matter if it's a Monday, a Tuesday, a year from now, 10 years from now, that same entrepreneur is like, I should be further ahead. I feel so behind. What I've decided to do, and this happened about 3 years ago, is I've just decided to be grateful for where I'm at and where I came from. Because when you start looking at the back data, it's like, holy cow. Right? You start having a healthier level of or you have to start having a healthier relationship with your journey. And as you do that, I think good things shake out. So I don't think it's tied to money. Again, I think my most unhappiest moments and many times had a lot of money attached to it or near it. What
You
I've
also
great
have
what I
somebody who's making like 5 million a year, you know, and they're hanging out with the Ed Milettes of the world, and they're thinking, well, Ed has a private jet. I need to have a private jet. I need to start making $100 million.
but again, you're in comparison. You're trying to be congruent with somebody else's expectation. You're not being congruent with your own expectation. Like, I just want to be the best version of me I can be, period. I may or may not own a jet one day. I don't know. Who the heck knows? Like, I had this one of my prayer meditation things that I've got I actually recorded my voice with some Hertz music reciting a few things. And one of the things that I've got in there specifically that I think it holds me accountable is that I'm able to be blessed and have an equal measure of charitable contribution at the same time. So, for example, and this is what I mean by that. If I can afford to buy a second or a third $1 million house, okay, then do I really need the house? Because it's just an extra property. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's a tax write-off. There's some benefits of owning real estate, no doubt. Or can I go feed 2 million people? Right. So I'm trying to hold myself accountable. If I have $1 to invest in myself and my lifestyle, then I want to be at the point where I also understand I'm going to invest an equal dollar in becoming a better human to the marketplace. Now, I may choose to invest this dollar differently because I don't want it to be squandered. So with my dad, I don't give him money. I try to teach him to use money. You know what I'm saying? So I think there's elements of that. Most people don't actually find their meaning and their significance until they've gone far enough along in their journey that they have wisdom and experience that blesses someone else behind them. That's what I've seen. It's the giving that brings joy. It's not the taking.
And if you had to articulate your purpose in life, how would you say that in a succinct way?
Serving the person I used to be. When I say that, it's not just happy, pick a point. It's who was Stephen at 6? Who was Stephen at 8? Who was Stephen at 12? Who was Stephen at 16? Who was Stephen at 20? Who was Stephen at 25, 28, 35, so on and so forth. Because Stephen along the journey needed different things at different times. Mm-hmm. But I'm uniquely qualified to help past Stevens, just as Steve Myrick was uniquely qualified to help this Stephen. And that creates, I say this all the time. This is another Myrickism that everyone should be striving to create a legacy that outlives them. And you do that through the correspondence of human interaction. It's not a book. It's not a podcast. It's not a movie. It's who, when you're gone, is going to say, they helped me change my life and I'm better because of it. And then takes all of that essence and then does it again for someone else. Steve Myrick, again, passed away in 2003. He never got to see CHE, my flagship company, become a good sized company. He never got to see me write my first book. He never got to see me. He's never seen me speak on a stage. He's never seen me in a social media reel, right? He's never seen any of that. He has no idea how many lives I've already touched because of him. So if he can do it that way, and I can figure out a way to do what he did at scale, then the legacy, it's dumb. It's ridiculous. It's countless lives changed because someone cared enough to care enough.
That's beautiful, man. I just got chills listening to that. I think he did see the potential, and maybe he didn't consciously know that that's what he was looking at, but I think that's very powerful to serve the person you used to be. And I think that's a great place to end it. And just want to thank you for coming on and sharing your story and for going there with me. Like a lot of times you have your own podcast, Unstoppable, which is great. And you speak a lot. So you've talked about your story 1,000 times, and when you're recounting it again, it's easy to kind of gloss over those pivotal moments. But I think that's really the gold in the story. Because I'm sure the person listening to this or watching this on YouTube is also feeling the same way I'm feeling right now, which is just you feel hopeful listening to a
Yeah.
story like that. And it inspires you to think about who in my life represents that person I used to be. And
Mm-hmm.
if I don't have someone, how can I find someone like that? And then
Mm-hmm.
that gives every day, every moment a greater sense of purpose. So thank you so much for sharing so generously and so openly. How can people who hear this and want to engage more with you, what are some of the best ways to do that?
And there are a couple of easy ways, but before I do that, I want to just thank you not just for the opportunity, but for this, but for creating an atmosphere of safety where it's okay to go to those spaces again and talk about those things. I think that's something it's a unique gift for you, and I'm very grateful for that. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
People can find me at stephenscoggins.com, and I'm on all the social channels as you can imagine. The one I'm most active on, that I'm personally active on, my team's in my DMs as well from time to time, but is actually Instagram. That's where I spend most of my time currently. But yeah, either one of those two places we could get connected for sure. And yeah, it's an honor to just be invited to give a chance at serving your audience. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you, man.
If you like that video, you're going to love the next one. Click this thumbnail right here, and I'll see you over there.